December 7, 1941, the morning sun cast long shadows across the still waters of Pearl Harbor as Commander Mitsuo Fuchida circled his Nakajima B-5N above the American naval base. Below him, 8 battleships sat like sleeping giants, their steel hulls gleaming in the early light. The smell of aviation fuel filled his cockpit as he raised his flare gun and fired the signal that would plunge 2 nations into total war. In that moment, as the first bombs began to fall, Japanese military leaders believed they had crippled not just a fleet, but the very heart of American industrial might. They had calculated carefully. America possessed fewer than 3,000 military aircraft. Japan's Zero fighters had dominated the skies over China for years. Victory, they assured Emperor Hirohito, would come within 6 months. What they could not foresee, in those smoke-filled minutes above Pearl Harbor, was that they had awakened something far more dangerous than any fleet or army. They had awakened American industry itself, a sleeping colossus that would soon darken the very skies they thought they controlled. The Japanese High Command's confidence was not born from arrogance alone, but from cold mathematical calculation. In 1941, the United States produced just 5,865 military aircraft. Japan had manufactured 4,768 of their own that same year, and their pilots had been hardened by 4 years of continuous combat over China. The Zero fighter had achieved an almost mythical status: lightweight, maneuverable, with a range that allowed it to escort bombers deeper into enemy territory than any American fighter could match. Japanese Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of the Pearl Harbor attack, had studied at Harvard and understood American potential better than most of his colleagues. Yet even he believed that Japan's head start and tactical superiority would allow them to establish an impregnable defensive perimeter across the Pacific before American production could respond. The sound that would come to haunt Japanese dreams began as nothing more than the gentle hum of a single rivet gun in a California aircraft factory. At Douglas Aircraft in Santa Monica, workers moved with the unhurried precision of peacetime manufacturing, producing DC-3 commercial airliners for TWA and American Airlines. The rivet gun's staccato rhythm was barely audible, above the conversations of men who still believed that America's role in the expanding global conflict would remain limited to supplying allies with weapons while keeping their own sons safely at home. That sound, metallic, rhythmic, industrial, would multiply and transform until it became the thunder that announced American dominance over every theater of the Second World War. General Hideki Tojo, Japan's Prime Minister and War Minister, had reviewed the intelligence reports with satisfaction. American aircraft factories were scattered and vulnerable. Boeing in Seattle, Consolidated in San Diego, North American in California. These facilities seemed impressive on paper, but Japan had witnessed the pathetic performance of American-built aircraft in the hands of Chinese pilots. The P-40 Warhawk, America's primary fighter, was considered obsolete by Japanese standards. Its pilots were untested, its tactics outdated. The Japanese military establishment looked at America and saw a nation grown soft by prosperity, a people more interested in Hollywood movies and automobile comfort than the harsh realities of modern warfare. Japanese intelligence officers had compiled detailed assessments of American industrial capacity, and their conclusions reinforced Tokyo's confidence. American aircraft production was fragmented among dozens of small manufacturers. Curtiss-Wright employed fewer than 20,000 workers. Boeing's Seattle facility was impressive, but specialized in commercial aviation. Lockheed was a minor player focused on experimental designs. The mathematical equation seemed simple. Japan's centralized, militarized aircraft industry could outproduce America's scattered civilian manufacturers, while Japanese pilots, veterans of 4 years of combat in China, would make short work of inexperienced American aviators flying inferior equipment. In the smoking aftermath of Pearl Harbor, as rescue crews pulled sailors from the oil-slicked waters and counted their dead. Japanese newspapers proclaimed the dawn of the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere. Editorial writers in Tokyo described America as a paper tiger, its military might revealed as hollow spectacle. The attack had been so complete, so devastating, that surely the Americans would sue for peace rather than face the disciplined war machine of the rising sun. Japanese military analysts pointed to their recent victories: Hong Kong fallen in 18 days, Singapore in 70, the Dutch East Indies in 3 months. American forces in the Philippines were crumbling under General Yamashita's relentless advance. Every calculation suggested that Japan had achieved the impossible. They had neutralized American naval power while America's industrial capacity remained trapped behind an ocean of distance and time. But in the factories of Detroit, Seattle, and Los Angeles, something extraordinary was already beginning to unfold. The gentle hum of that single rivet gun was about to become a symphony that would rewrite the mathematics of global warfare. Within hours of Pearl Harbor, Henry J. Kaiser, a construction magnate who had never built a ship in his life, was meeting with government officials to discuss impossible production schedules. Donald Douglas, whose company had built commercial airliners for peaceful skies, was already drafting plans to mass-produce military aircraft using assembly line techniques perfected by Henry Ford. At Consolidated Aircraft in San Diego, engineers worked through the night redesigning their B-24 Liberator bomber for rapid production. These were not military men speaking, but industrialists, Americans who understood that war had become a contest of production as much as courage, and who possessed something Japanese. Planners had fatally underestimated the infrastructure and mindset of mass production perfected over decades of civilian manufacturing. The rivet gun's rhythm began to multiply, echoing through factories that transformed overnight from producing Buicks and Fords to manufacturing P-51 Mustangs and B-24 Liberators. At General Motors' Willow Run plant outside Detroit, the largest manufacturing facility in the world stretched for over a mile under a single roof. Here, workers who had spent their careers installing chrome bumpers and leather seats now learned to rivet aluminum wings and install 50-caliber machine guns. The sound of their work, thousands of rivet guns firing in mechanical percussion, created a music that Japanese intelligence officers, monitoring American radio broadcasts, dismissed as propaganda fantasy. American industrial transformation began with materials that Japanese planners had not adequately considered. The United States controlled 60% of the world's aluminum production, with massive smelters powered by hydroelectric dams that Japan could never hope to destroy. American steel production dwarfed Japan's by a factor of 12 to 1. Most critically, America possessed rubber plantations in Liberia and synthetic rubber plants that made Japanese conquest of Southeast Asian rubber sources strategically irrelevant. While Japanese planners celebrated their capture of Dutch East Indies oil fields, American petroleum production exceeded Japan's by a factor of more than 100 to 1. The transformation began with aluminum, that silver metal that would become the sinew of American air power. Before Pearl Harbor, the United States produced 287,000 tons of aluminum annually. By 1943, that figure had exploded to 1.2 million tons, with new smelters rising along the Columbia River, where cheap hydroelectric power could feed the voracious energy demands of aluminum production. Entire towns materialized around these facilities: Longview, Washington; Riverbank, California, populated by workers who had never seen an airplane factory, but now found themselves building the wings that would carry American bombs to Tokyo. Japanese Colonel Masataka Ida, Chief of Aircraft Intelligence for the Imperial General Staff, studied reconnaissance photographs of American industrial facilities with growing bewilderment. The images showed factory complexes that dwarfed anything in Japan, assembly lines that stretched beyond the borders of entire city districts. His analysts calculated that a single American plant could produce more aircraft in a month than Japan's entire aviation industry manufactured in a quarter. Yet Ida remained confident that these numbers represented American boastfulness rather than reality. No workforce could master the precision required for aircraft assembly in mere months. No democratic society could coordinate such complex industrial undertakings without the discipline and unity that characterized the Japanese system. The rivet guns proved him catastrophically wrong. American workers, trained in the precision manufacturing techniques developed by the automobile industry, adapted to aircraft production with a speed that defied Japanese understanding of industrial learning curves. At Ford's Willow Run plant, workers who had never seen a B-24 Liberator were producing one complete bomber every 63 minutes by the plant's peak operational period. The precision was extraordinary. Tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch, maintained by factory workers who had learned their trades not in military academies, but in vocational schools hastily established to meet wartime demand. By the end of 1942, American factories had produced 47,836 military aircraft, more than Japan's entire air force at the beginning of the war. But production was only half the equation. The other half was transformation, the conversion of American civilians into the most formidable air force the world had ever seen. In training bases across the American South and West, young men who had never flown anything more complex than a crop duster learned to pilot four-engine bombers carrying 10 tons of explosives. The scale defied comprehension. At one training facility in Texas, more pilots received their wings in a single month than Japan graduated in an entire year. The sound of rivet guns was joined by the deeper rumble of aircraft engines as American production reached full stride. Pratt & Whitney's East Hartford plant operated around the clock, producing R-2800 double Wasp engines that would power Republic P-47 Thunderbolts and Grumman F-6F Hellcats. Each engine required 15,000 precision-machined parts, assembled by workers whose grandparents had been farmers and whose children would become engineers. Wright Aeronautical in Paterson, New Jersey, manufactured the massive R-3350 engines that powered B-29 Superfortresses, each engine producing 2,200 horsepower through technological innovations that exceeded anything in Japanese. Arsenal's American aircraft production was not merely about quantity. It represented a qualitative revolution that Japanese engineers struggled to comprehend. The P-51 Mustang, designed and built in just 102 days, incorporated aerodynamic innovations that made it superior to any fighter in the world. Its laminar flow wing design, developed through wind tunnel testing at NACA laboratories, provided performance characteristics that no Japanese aircraft could match. The Packard Motor Company, which had built luxury automobiles for Hollywood stars, retooled its factories to manufacture Rolls-Royce Merlin engines under license, achieving production rates that exceeded the original British manufacturers while maintaining quality standards that surpassed European precision manufacturing. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, Japan's leading fighter race, encountered his first formation of American B-17. Flying fortresses over the Solomon Islands in August 1942, he approached the bombing formation with the confidence born of dozens of aerial victories, expecting to slash through the American bombers like a sword through silk. Instead, he found himself facing a coordinated defensive system unlike anything he had experienced. The B-17s flew in tight formations, their overlapping fields of fire creating zones of death that even the nimble Zero could not penetrate without devastating losses. When Sakai finally managed to close with one of the bombers, its defensive armament, 1350 caliber, machine guns manufactured in American factories that had never existed 4 years earlier, nearly shot his aircraft to pieces. He limped back to base with a shattered canopy and wounds that would keep him grounded for months, reporting to his superiors that the Americans had developed tactics and aircraft far more sophisticated than intelligence had suggested. But what truly disturbed Sakai was not the defensive firepower of the B-17s, but their abundance. The formation he had attacked was replaced the next day by an even larger one, and the day after that by two formations flying simultaneously. The rivet guns in American factories were producing aircraft faster than Japanese pilots could shoot them down, creating a mathematical impossibility that no amount of Japanese fighting spirit could overcome. The sound of American industry had become a crescendo that could be heard across the Pacific. Japanese radar operators on Marshall Island atolls reported formations of 50, then 100, then 200 American aircraft approaching from multiple directions simultaneously. The mathematical impossibility of it overwhelmed Japanese defensive planning. How could any nation possess so many aircraft that they could afford to lose dozens in a single mission and return the next day with even larger formations? The answer lay in production numbers that exceeded Japanese comprehension. American factories were producing aircraft at rates that made losses not just acceptable but strategically irrelevant. At North American Aviation's Inglewood plant, workers produced P-51 Mustang fighters using assembly line techniques that reduced construction time from 120 days to 40 days per aircraft. The factory employed 41,000 workers organized into 3 shifts that maintained continuous production 24 hours a day. Each P-51 required 22,000 individual parts manufactured to tolerances that rivaled Swiss watchmaking. Yet American workers achieved this precision while producing 15 aircraft per day at peak output. The rivet guns that assembled these fighters fired with the regularity of industrial metronomes, creating aircraft that could escort bombers to targets 1,500 miles away and return with fuel to spare. Japanese General Korochika Anami, inspecting damaged airfields in the Marshall Islands in early 1944, stood amid the wreckage of what had once been Japan's most advanced Pacific air base. The concrete runways bore the distinctive circular scars of American bombs, but it was not the physical damage that disturbed him most deeply. It was the frequency of the attacks. American bombers appeared over Japanese positions with a regularity that seemed to mock the very concept of air defense. His anti-aircraft crews reported that they could hear American aircraft engines for hours before dawn and hours after sunset, a continuous mechanical thunder that never seemed to fade completely. The answer lay in the transformation of American society itself. Rosie the Riveter was not merely a propaganda symbol, but a representation of millions of American women who had entered the workforce to build the weapons of victory. At Boeing's Plant 2 in Seattle, women comprised 60% of the workforce building B-17 flying fortresses. Their fingers, trained in delicate domestic tasks, proved ideally suited to the precision work of aircraft assembly. They wired electrical systems, installed instruments, and operated rivet guns with an accuracy that amazed their supervisors. At Consolidated Aircraft in San Diego, women workers achieved production rates that exceeded their male predecessors while maintaining higher quality standards in precision manufacturing. Japanese intelligence had predicted that American morale would collapse under the strain of total war, that a soft, democratic society could never match the disciplined sacrifice of the Japanese people. Instead, they discovered that democracy had unleashed energies and creativities that no totalitarian system could match. American workers volunteered for overtime shifts, competed between factories to exceed production quotas, and developed innovations that improved manufacturing efficiency without central planning or government coercion. The rivet gun became the heartbeat of this voluntary mobilization, its rhythm echoing through factories where free people chose to transform their entire civilization for the sake of victory. The rivet gun became the heartbeat of American victory, its rhythm echoing through factories that operated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Ford's Rouge River plant, the largest integrated manufacturing complex in the world, switched from producing civilian automobiles to building B-24 Liberator bombers at a rate that Japanese intelligence officers initially dismissed as impossible. The facility employed 120,000 workers who produced aircraft using assembly line techniques that reduced B-24 construction time from months to weeks. Each bomber required 1.3 million rivets. Installed by workers whose precision approached that of scientific instruments, yet who maintained production rates that exceeded all peacetime manufacturing records. By 1943, American aircraft production had achieved numbers that existed outside Japanese comprehension. Republic Aviation's Farmingdale plant produced P-47 Thunderbolt fighters at a rate of 25 aircraft per day. Each P-47 weighed 14,000 pounds fully loaded, more than most Japanese bombers, yet American factories produced them with the casual efficiency of automobile manufacturing. The rivet guns that assembled these aerial juggernauts fired with mechanical precision, creating aircraft armed with 8 50-caliber machine guns and capable of carrying 2,500 pounds of bombs while maintaining air superiority against any Japanese fighter. Grumman's Bethpage plant, manufacturing F-6F Hellcat fighters on Long Island, achieved production rates that approached the fantastical. At peak output, the facility completed 12 Hellcats per day, each aircraft incorporating technological innovations that represented years of engineering development compressed into months of intensive design work. The F-6F's R-2800 engine produced 2,000 horsepower, more than twice the power of Japan's most advanced fighter engines, while American manufacturing techniques ensured that each engine met performance specifications that Japanese engineers considered theoretically perfect but practically impossible to achieve in mass production. By 1944, the noise of American aircraft engines had become omnipresent across the Pacific. On Saipan, Japanese soldiers huddled in caves as formations of B-29 superfortresses passed overhead like mechanical thunderclouds, their 4 Wright R-3350 engines generating a bass note so deep it could be felt in the bones. These were not the relatively modest bombers that had first appeared over Japanese positions. These were flying fortresses larger than most buildings, each one capable of carrying 10 tons of explosives across distances that spanned entire oceans. The B-29 represented American industrial achievement at its apex. Pressurized cabins that allowed crews to operate at altitudes where Japanese fighters could barely function. Defensive systems coordinated by analog computers. Bomb sites that could place explosives within yards of their intended targets from heights of 6 miles. The rivet guns that had built these aerial leviathans operated with a precision that defied Japanese understanding of mass production. Each B-29 required 55,000 rivets, installed by workers who had learned their trades in automobile factories and applied them to the mathematics of strategic bombing. The Boeing plant in Wichita, Kansas, employed 26,000 workers who had never seen an ocean but now built aircraft designed to strike targets 8,000 miles away. Their rivet guns fired with the regularity of metronomes, creating aircraft that could carry more bombs farther than any weapon system in human history. The mathematical precision of American production overwhelmed Japanese strategic planning. Bell Aircraft's Buffalo plant manufactured P-39 Airacobra fighters using techniques that produced complete aircraft in assembly line fashion, with final assembly requiring just 4 hours per airplane. Lockheed's Burbank facility produced P-38 Lightning twin-engine fighters at rates that exceeded Japan's total production of all aircraft types. Each P-38 required 150,000 rivets. Installed by workers whose precision rivaled that of scientific instrument makers, yet who maintained production schedules that treated complex aircraft as routine manufacturing products. Japanese interceptor pilots who managed to reach B-29 altitude found themselves facing not individual aircraft, but coordinated formations protected by long-range fighters that had flown escort missions of over 2,500 miles. The P-51 Mustang, with its Packard-built Merlin engine and laminar flow wing design, could outfight the Zero at any altitude while carrying enough fuel to accompany bombers to targets deep in the Japanese home islands. Colonel Naoshi Kano, one of Japan's most experienced fighter commanders, described engaging a formation of P-51s over Iwo Jima as fighting shadows. The American fighters appeared and disappeared with a speed and coordination that seemed almost supernatural to pilots trained in the individual combat, techniques that had served Japan so well. In the early years of the war, American production had transcended mere manufacturing to become a form of industrial warfare that Japanese planners had never conceived possible. Vultee Aircraft's Nashville plant produced BT-13 training aircraft at such rates that America was training more pilots per month than Japan possessed experienced aviators in its entire air force. Consolidated's Fort Worth facility manufactured B-24 Liberator bombers while simultaneously expanding production capacity, creating an industrial momentum that generated its own exponential growth. The rivet guns in these facilities operated around the clock, their percussion creating aircraft faster than Japanese intelligence could count. Them, the industrial symphony that had begun with a single rivet gun in California, now reached its crescendo in the skies over Japan itself. Operation Meeting House, the firebombing of Tokyo on March 9–10, 1945, involved 334 B-29 bombers carrying 1,665 tons of incendiary bombs. The attack was not remarkable for its destructiveness alone, but for what it represented. America's ability to project industrial power across 6,000 miles of ocean with such precision and scale that entire cities could be systematically destroyed in single nights. Japanese fire wardens, watching the approaching formations through binoculars, could hear the drone of American engines 30 minutes before the first bombs fell, a sound that had become the voice of American abundance transformed into the mathematics of total war. The sound of rivet guns echoed through every aspect of American aircraft production, from the massive B-29 assembly lines in Wichita to the fighter factories in Los Angeles where P-38 Lightnings rolled off. Production lines at a rate that exceeded Japan's ability to comprehend the numbers. Lockheed's Burbank plant employed 94,000 workers who produced 9,123 P-38 toward aircraft during the war years, more twin-engine fighters than Japan manufactured aircraft of all types in Nidoi Tintur. 1944, each P-38 required 150,000 rivets, installed by workers whose precision rivaling that of Swiss watchmakers, yet who had learned their trades in crash courses, designed to meet wartime production demands. American innovation transcended mere quantity to achieve qualitative superiority that rendered Japanese technological advantages obsolete. The development of radar-equipped night fighters transformed aerial combat from individual duels to systematic technological warfare. Northrop's P-61 Black Widow, equipped with airborne radar systems manufactured by Bell Laboratories, could detect and intercept Japanese aircraft in total darkness from distances exceeding 20 miles. Each P-61 represented American technological integration at its finest. Aircraft, radar, and weaponry coordinated through electronic systems that Japanese engineers considered theoretical impossibilities made manifest through American manufacturing precision. Douglas Aircraft's Long Beach plant manufactured A-20 Havoc attack bombers using production techniques that achieved military precision through civilian manufacturing efficiency. The facility produced aircraft incorporating innovations developed simultaneously across dozens of American research institutions. NACA wind tunnels providing aerodynamic data, MIT Laboratories developing navigational systems, Bell Labs creating electronic warfare equipment, all coordinated through industrial planning that made American aircraft technologically superior to Japanese designs while being produced in quantities that rendered Japanese air power mathematically irrelevant. But perhaps the most profound symbol of American industrial transformation was not any aircraft or weapon system, but the simple aluminum rivet itself, millions upon millions of them, each one precisely manufactured, each one representing the intersection of American abundance and American precision. Japanese prisoners of war examined American aircraft wreckage with fascination and growing despair. The rivets were perfectly formed, with smooth heads and precise dimensions that spoke of manufacturing capabilities beyond Japanese comprehension. Even more disturbing was the sheer quantity. American aircraft were so abundantly riveted that Japanese engineers calculated the aluminum content of a single B-29 could build 3 Zero fighters. Yet Americans produced B-29s with the casual abundance that Japan reserved for training aircraft. The mathematical impossibility of American production became evident in manufacturing statistics that Japanese intelligence officers initially refused to believe. Curtiss Wright's Buffalo plant produced C-46 Commando transport aircraft while simultaneously manufacturing Wright R-2600 engines for B-25 Mitchell bombers. Martin's Baltimore facility produced B-26 Marauder bombers alongside PBM Mariner flying boats. Each facility employed tens of thousands of workers, achieving production rates that exceeded Japan's total aircraft manufacturing capacity while maintaining quality standards that surpassed Japanese. Precision manufacturing in every measurable category. Emperor Hirohito, reviewing intelligence reports in his bunker beneath the imperial palace, struggled to comprehend the numbers his advisors presented. American aircraft production for 1944, 96,318 planes. Total American production since Pearl Harbor, over 250,000 military aircraft. These figures seemed to exist outside the realm of possibility, yet every day brought fresh evidence of their reality. American bombers now appeared over Japanese cities in formations of 500 or more, escorted by fighters that fought with tactics and equipment superior to anything Japan could field. The mathematical certainty that had once assured Japanese victory had been reversed. America was producing aircraft faster than Japan could train pilots to oppose them, creating a strategic situation where Japanese air power faced extinction through simple industrial mathematics. The rivet guns had created more than aircraft. They had created a new form of warfare entirely. Strategic bombing campaigns that Japanese planners had considered impossible were now routine operations. The destruction of Japanese aircraft factories, once thought invulnerable behind thousands of miles of ocean, became systematic exercises in industrial mathematics. American planners could calculate precisely how many tons of bombs were required to destroy specific production facilities, then dispatch sufficient aircraft to deliver those bombs with the certainty of an engineering equation. Japanese aircraft production, which had peaked at 28,180 aircraft in 1944, was systematically dismantled by American bombing campaigns that treated Japanese industrial capacity as mathematical problems to be solved. Through the application of overwhelming aerial firepower, American technological innovation had created aircraft that transcended traditional military categories. The B-29 Superfortress represented not merely a bomber, but a flying command center equipped with pressurized cabins, radar-directed defensive armament, and navigational systems that could deliver precision bombing across intercontinental distances. Each B-29 incorporated technological advances that represented the coordinated efforts of American industry. Boeing's aeronautical engineering, Wright's engine technology, Sperry's gyroscopic systems, General Electric's turbochargers, all integrated through manufacturing. Precision that achieved tolerances measured in thousandths of inches while maintaining production rates that treated these technological marvels as routine manufacturing products. General Curtis LeMay, architect of the strategic bombing campaign against Japan, stood on the observation deck of his headquarters on Guam in July 1945 and watched his B-29s returning from another mission over the Japanese mainland. The sound of their engines, that deep, rhythmic thunder that had evolved from the gentle hum of rivet guns in peacetime factories, filled the tropical air for over an hour as 600 bombers landed at air bases across the Mariana Islands. Each aircraft represented not just American industrial capacity, but American abundance: the aluminum mines of Arkansas, the rubber plantations of Liberia, the petroleum refineries of Texas, all coordinated by a civilian economy that had discovered it could produce both guns and butter in quantities that defied traditional military economics. The Japanese generals who had laughed at American industry in December 1941 now found themselves governing a nation where children no longer played outside during daylight hours, where the sound of aircraft engines produced panic in cities that had once felt invulnerable. The soft Americans had created an air force of over 2.3 million personnel flying 300,000 aircraft, a force larger than Japan's entire population of military-age males. Every assumption about American weakness had proven not merely wrong, but catastrophically, historically wrong. American production had achieved a momentum that transcended military necessity to become a demonstration of democratic industrial capacity. Ryan Aeronautical's San Diego plant manufactured PT-22 training aircraft while simultaneously producing components for B-24 bombers. Stearman Aircraft's Wichita facility produced PT-17 trainers alongside Boeing B-29 components. The integration of American manufacturing had created an industrial ecosystem where civilian contractors, military specifications, and technological innovation combined to produce weapons systems that exceeded Japanese technological capabilities while being manufactured in quantities that rendered Japanese military planning obsolete. The Yortut rivet guns that had built this aerial armada continued their mechanical percussion even as Japan's cities burned. American factories increased production through 1945, building aircraft for invasions that would never come, preparing for battles that atomic weapons would render unnecessary. The industrial momentum that had begun with Pearl Harbor had acquired its own unstoppable force, creating a manufacturing capability that dwarfed the combined production of all other nations. Fairchild's Hagerstown plant produced PT-19 trainers while manufacturing C-82 transport aircraft. Republic's Evansville facility produced P-47 Thunderbolts alongside AT-12 advanced trainers. The coordination of American manufacturing had created an industrial symphony where individual factories played specific roles in a coordinated performance that produced victory through mathematical certainty. In the Emperor's bunker, as reports arrived of Hiroshima's destruction by a single American bomber carrying a weapon that harnessed the very forces of the sun, Japanese leaders finally understood the true meaning of the numbers they had. Dismissed so casually in 1941, America had not merely outproduced Japan, it had redefined the very concept of industrial warfare. The Manhattan Project, which created the atomic bomb, had employed 130,000 workers at facilities that dwarfed entire Japanese cities. The B-29 that carried Fat Man to Nagasaki was one of nearly 4,000 superfortresses built by American workers who had learned their trades in peacetime factories and applied them to the mathematics of victory, the sound that had begun as the gentle rhythm of a single rivet. Gun had become a roar that echoed from the Aleutians to the Philippines, from China to the heart of Japan itself. It was the sound of democracy mobilized, of free people choosing to transform their entire civilization for the sake of victory. Japanese military leaders, trained to believe that spirit and discipline could overcome any material disadvantage, discovered that American abundance was not a sign of weakness, but of strength, the strength of a society so productive that it could afford to build 300,000 military aircraft while simultaneously improving the standard of living for its civilian population. The laughter had died long ago, replaced by the deeper understanding that Japan had not simply attacked a nation, but had awakened a force of production and innovation that would reshape the entire world. The rivet guns, firing in their millions across American factories, had created more than weapons. They had created a new form of civilization, one capable of coordinating the most complex industrial undertaking in human history while maintaining the democratic freedoms that totalitarian societies believed made such coordination impossible. American aircraft production had become a form of industrial poetry, each rivet gun contributing to a mechanical symphony that transformed raw materials into instruments of liberation. The workers who operated these tools, farmers' sons from Iowa, factory workers from Detroit, women who had never seen an aircraft before Pearl Harbor, had created through their coordinated efforts a demonstration of democratic capability that no totalitarian system could match or understand. Their rivet guns had built not merely aircraft, but proof that free societies possessed reserves of strength and creativity that authoritarian regimes could neither measure nor counter. As Emperor Hirohito prepared his surrender, broadcast in August 1945, the sound he heard through the thick concrete walls of his bunker was not the traditional music of Japanese ceremony, but the drone of American aircraft engines, B-29s carrying supplies to prisoners of war, P-51s patrolling skies that had become American by right of conquest, transport planes bringing occupation forces to airfields built by Japanese workers who now understood that they had been fighting not just an enemy, but an entire philosophy of abundance. The 300,000 aircraft that had filled Japanese skies represented more than American industrial might. They embodied the mathematical poetry of freedom itself, the discovery that a democratic society could mobilize resources and energies that no authoritarian system could match. In the end, Japanese generals had not simply miscalculated American production capacity, they had misunderstood the very nature of the society they had chosen to fight. Learning too late that democracy's apparent chaos masked an organizational power that could transform the world's largest peacetime economy into the world's most formidable war machine in the span of a single presidential term, the rivet gun's rhythm would echo through history as the heartbeat of American triumph, but also as a reminder that industrial abundance, when married to democratic purpose, could write equations of victory that rendered all traditional military calculations obsolete. Each rivet, precisely placed by workers who had volunteered their skills to the cause of freedom, became part of a larger theorem proving that free societies possessed reserves of strength that no dictatorship could measure or match. The sound of those engines would fade from the Pacific skies, but the lesson they taught would resonate through the ages. That American industry, awakened from its peaceful slumber, could transform the very mathematics of warfare, turning the laughter of enemies into the silence of surrender through the simple, inexorable rhythm of democratic production. The rivet gun had become more than a tool. It had become the heartbeat of freedom itself, proving that when democracy chose to fight, it fought with the full power of human ingenuity unleashed, coordinated not through coercion, but through the voluntary cooperation of free people united in common cause.